I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. My Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with a head. Intercepted. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, Bucs fans, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast, live on YouTube today for a brand new episode. NFL free agency has arrived, and for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they have surely been busy on this Monday afternoon. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me, as always, my good buddy and co-host from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. We have got another loaded show for you today. As I had implied earlier, the Buccaneers have been busy. And I got to tell you, Evan, under the Jason Light regime, this seems like the most quick and efficient free agency as far as checking all of their boxes on day one, quite literally here. They get an edge rusher, they re-sign some talent, and they lock down another starter on that offensive line for the foreseeable future. There is a lot to like so far.
Yeah, and it started on Friday night, right, with the re-signing of Lavonte David announcing really himself first that he was coming back to Tampa Bay. I mean, really, it was either going to be retirement or return to the Bucs, right? I don't really think we thought he was going to end up anywhere else. So not saying that news was surprising, but still good to see. And then, like you said, around 11:30 today or so, earlier this morning, Ben Bredeson ends up returning to the Buccaneers, and then the legal tampering period begins at noon. And even with Twitter being down, we're still able to get news that Haason Reddick signs or agrees to terms, I should say, with the Buccaneers. And then just moments later, maybe like 5 minutes later, Chris Godwin agrees to terms to return to Tampa Bay. So yeah, you're right. They have been very busy thus far, and really, got their big three free agent dominoes out of the way in terms of guys they needed to bring back. Right, I think when you looked at it, your three priorities would have been Godwin, David, and Bredeson, and now it's sort of just like, okay, wait and see what guys' markets are, and see if you can bring some of these guys back who are also free agents, and plus, adding a pass rusher, which is something that we felt they've needed, and we're gonna break it all down right here as and maybe we even get some more news. Maybe it'll happen as soon as we hang up here, which I'm sure will be likely. But we will see what happens. You never know this time of year. But yeah, Buccaneers have been quite busy lately.
So we're going to start breaking down these contracts and ultimately the implications for that position, for that player, for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I guess we will just go in the order that it happened, right? So we will kick things off Friday night. You said Lavonte David announces he will be back with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It is a one-year deal up to $10 million, $9 million guaranteed. He will be returning for his 14th season as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. Lavonte David, 14 years in a Buccaneer uniform. There is another linebacker in Buccaneers history who played 14 seasons, and many consider him the greatest player in the history of the franchise. So we've spoken time and time again how much Lavonte David means to not only this defense, but the Buccaneers franchise as a whole. To have a guy like this back, regardless of what the haters are going to say, regardless of what the analytic nerds are going to say, I don't care. He is still moving and grooving at 35 years old. And I have no doubts he will continue to be a contributor in this Buccaneer defense. But Buccaneers bring back a legend in Lavonte David, and I'm glad to see him give it another go. I think that after last season, yes, there's some areas where he's not quite as quick and efficient as he used to be, but he's still getting it done a hell of a lot better than a lot of linebackers in the NFL at 34, 35 years old. Very happy to see number 54 back in Tampa Bay here, Evan.
Absolutely. And look, he's just one of those guys that sort of needed to end his career right where it began. And hey, maybe he plays another year, maybe he doesn't, but like, at this point it's a year-to-year thing, right? And it is very like funny, like the parallels, right, between Lavonte David and Derek Brooks. Obviously, Lavonte David being the best linebacker they've had since Brooks. Um, close, very similar numbers, right? 55, 54. And now they're both, playing 14 years with Tampa Bay, won a Super Bowl at Tampa Bay. Yeah, very, very close here. Just like I said, when you look at it, right next to each other, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool. So yeah, David comes back, and like you said, and I don't think he's not the same player he was 6 years ago. It's fine, still damn good, right? He's still a good football player, though. That doesn't mean I think this defense would have been worse off without him. And also, just taking a look at some of the markets for a lot of these inside linebackers, which had a number of them actually re-sign. Jamie and Sherwood, the Jets went back there. Ernest Jones, Seahawks went back. Nick Bolton with the Chiefs went back. The market has been thinned out a little bit, and these inside linebackers are getting paid. Like even a guy like Bobby Wagner ended up going back to Washington. So if the Buccaneers had decided to move on from Lavonte David, or if David had decided to retire, uh, you know, it, it wouldn't have been great, I don't think, because it would have been tough to replace that kind of guy. So this defense is much better, in a much better position now that David's back. There's still work to do. I still think they need to add another linebacker at some point, whether it be in free agency or the draft. I don't think they can just be done just because David's back. You still, that was a big weakness even with Lavonte David last year. The inside linebacker room was something they need to improve upon. But step one was getting him back, and you know. I think there was some doubt after that playoff game that he was going to return. I think a lot of people, and even I said, you could just feel a vibe. I thought that, they were going to wait and see, but it seemed like a dude who played his last game, and I'm glad that he's returning instead.
Well, Gerald McCoy was showing up to those last few games. He was taking pictures and hugging them before the game starts, which, I mean, Gerald McCoy has always been a vocal supporter of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at least the last couple of years. After he left and went to the Panthers, there was that divide for a little while, but GMAC has come around. But it seems like, he only shows up for special occasions. And I think the context clues there, like you said, there were just some vibes given throughout the final weeks of the season that he may or may not be back. And listen, that's what happens when you reach this point of your career. 14 years is a very long time in the NFL. Very successful career for Lavonte David, and a storied one. Hopefully he gets a gold jacket at the end of it. I think he deserves it. But just to emphasize your point, yes, you got Lavonte David back at linebacker, but the Buccaneers still probably have a hole or two in that position solely because of depth. It was announced a couple of days ago, at least it's been implied this entire time, that they're not going to bring back J.J. Russell. So that is another depth piece that you're probably, I don't know if you see any more signings at linebacker. That would be interesting, but I definitely think that they're going to have to add another face or two there for sure.
So I think you could, but I think it's going to be one of the things where the Bucs might have to wait out some markets here. It might be one of them. You know how this week is going to be your tier one guys, right? Your big names and stuff like that. And then next week, you'll see some news, right? And you'll be on to your tier two free agents kinda. I think that's where the Bucs maybe could make a little bit of a move there. A guy like Tyrell Dotson, who I had in my mock off season, is still available for now. Robert Spillane ended up signing, I believe, me with the Patriots. It might have been.
Yeah, it was
so.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, he's off the board. He could have been an option. Um, but there's a couple other ones. Obviously, the big one that a lot of people are going to talk about is Dre Greenlaw. He's still available. There's a lot of questions with him though, because of the injury and everything. Is he going to be ready? Is what type of player are you getting, right? Because Dre Greenlaw, 100% healthy, is a great player, but that injury could impact things. So. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say 100% they're not going to sign one, but at this rate, I think it's going to take some time. I don't really think you're going to see like them sign a linebacker like tonight, right? I think at that point they're going to have to wait out a little bit and hope some of these prices goes down for these inside linebackers.
As we roll into today's news, this is really where the frenzy begins, if you will. Earlier this morning, as you had said, the Buccaneers signed offensive guard Ben Bredeson to a 3-year deal worth $22 million, $12.5 million guaranteed. Bredeson was a solid starter for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2024, and if I'm not mistaken, the Buccaneers paid him somewhere around $6 to $7 million last season. Really quick, just a shout out to Beaver for the $2 super chat. He said, just want to take a moment to say thank you, Jason. Of course, referring to Jason Light and the rest of that Tampa Bay Buccaneers front office. Taking care of business. And thank you, Beaver, for the $2 super chat. We truly appreciate you and the rest of the Cannon Fire crew hanging out with us live on YouTube today. But back into this contract here for offensive guard Ben Bredeson. I think he earned every bit of it. Curious your thoughts on the money aspect of it. A lot of people are curious why Ben Bredeson might be fetching this kind of price, but I don't think you can necessarily overrate the work that he was able to do last year, stabling up this Buccaneers offensive line. The Bucs offensive line is going to go from 2024 to 2025, it's going to be the same group of starters, the entire front five, for the first time since I think 2020 to 2021.
I think you might be
did
right.
Ali Marpet retire after the Super Bowl? He retired after 21.
No. Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's the last time that's happened. I like seeing Bredeson back. I was pleasantly surprised. I think people were kind of dogging on him early in the season, but he came around, and again, I think just much needed stability here for this offensive line, especially with that guard spot.
Yeah, so I don't. The guards were projected to do pretty well in free agency this year, which it seems like they always are. It seems like interior offensive linemen do pretty well, and interior defensive linemen do pretty well. I obviously in my mock offseason, I signed Ben Bredeson to a 1 year, I think like $5.5 million deal. So, I mean, 7.3 it comes out to, not too far off. My thing is the years. That's where I have a little bit of pause. I don't love 3 years just because, like, I mean, Bredeson was decent, right? But it feels like, and I don't know how the contract is structured, right? They might be able to get out of it after 1 year. Who knows? We don't know exact details like that right now. But that's the one thing that really stuck out to me, that they gave him a 3-year deal. That was surprising. Think maybe they had to maybe keep that AAV down a little bit.
Yeah.
Because if it's a 1 or 2 year deal, maybe it's a little bit more expensive. So maybe a slight overpay, but I think the value of keeping your offensive line intact, which was like, it wasn't like the unit sucked and you're keeping it intact. Like, it was a good unit, one of the best in the NFL, and you're keeping that together from 2024 to 2025, I think was pretty important. So I think it's fine. Both the team and the player, I think, come out on top here. The team got a value in Ben Bredeson last year for what they signed him for, right? I think it was like, you said 6. I think it's like 1 year 3. Yeah. It was like $3 million. Bredeson more than doubling his salary now. So worked out for the team last year, and now it works out for Bredeson this year. So the years surprised me a little bit more than the money did.
And again, just to emphasize the depth at that position as well, we talked about the new shiny starter being signed, which is fine and dandy. But with the departure of Robert Hainsey, a guy who has experience playing both guard and center on this offensive line,
which isn't official but expected,
right? I mean, it will more than likely happen if it hasn't happened, or if it doesn't happen at this point, I will be pleasantly surprised. I would love to be wrong on that one, because in my opinion, Robert Hainsey is a guy I would like to have on my football team if I was running the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But regardless, depth is really going to have to be a conversation once again, and look for, once training camp rolls around, look for a lot of hubbub about that backup guard spot, maybe any backup center battles. But I'm curious to see if the Buccaneers go out and sign some more depth, or you just bring some of these guys in as camp bodies and let them fight for the job that way. But let's move on to another signing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and this one I think is going to have the most opinions on it.
Well, now we're getting into the two biggest ones.
Well, into the weeds here. Yeah, I mean, these were the two.
Now we're getting into the ones where people are going to want to talk about the most.
Yeah, I mean, and by all means, I completely understand why. These are the two biggest needs the Buccaneers had. Chris Godwin, obviously, we will get to that here in a minute, but Haason Reddick, former New York Jet, signs with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on a 1-year, $14 million deal, $12 million guaranteed. Haason Reddick is a guy who is no stranger to discussion here on the Cannon Fire podcast. We talked about him towards the beginning of the season because you remember he was kind of in a bad situation with New York. Felt like a lot of that season he was just in limbo. There wasn't a whole lot going on with either side, and I think ultimately his reputation suffered. There's a lot of people who may feel like that this is a risk for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and to be honest, I think it's okay to feel that way as well because the Buccaneers had I guess a high risk player in Randy Gregory looking to get some edge rush help. Now he is not on the same level as a Haason Reddick is, but when it comes to controversy, there's a lot to be said, right? There's a lot of opinions being thrown around about the guy. The Buccaneers rolled the dice and they lost with Randy Gregory. It wasn't as big of a loss as $14 million a year could potentially be, but I do ultimately feel like this is high risk, high reward. When Haason Reddick has been available, he is one of the better pass rushers in the NFL. This is very clearly a 1-year prove-it deal. And $14 million, I'm not really going to nickel or dime because Myles Garrett just finessed the Cleveland Browns out of $40 million a season. I know Haason Reddick's not at that level, but I'm okay with paying $14 million for 1 year of let's try it out and see what happens, right? How do you feel about this? Should the Bucs have taken a cleaner route with an edge rusher? Could they have afforded a cleaner route for a big name edge rusher? I think the negative reputation here with Haason Reddick is really the main reason the Bucs were even able to afford him at this point.
Yeah, so a couple minutes, maybe like an hour before the tampering period starts, Khalil Mack returns to the Los Angeles Chargers. Obviously, Mack had ties to the Buccaneers. 1 year, $18 million, I believe, which is sort of the writing was on the wall there for me. Like, I think I'd even mentioned that last week where it would have been a surprise. Once they released Joey Bosa, like, kind of would have been a surprise if the Chargers lost both edge rushers in one off season. The interesting thing with Reddick, last year, it was a whirlwind of a season, right? The trade, he wants the contract. Here's the difference between Haason Reddick and Randy Gregory, though. Just because you want a contract doesn't mean you have a bad character, right? Like, maybe a little bit selfish viewed by some, right? Maybe. But just because you want a new contract, a new deal, doesn't mean you have bad character. He didn't get it, right? He didn't get that new deal from Philly. He, gets his trade. The Jets trade for him, not agreeing to a deal. Right? They never agreed to a deal. He sits out a little bit, and then he comes in mid-season after not, playing at all in the training camp or preseason, and things don't go well, right? Things just simply do not go well. He wasn't good last year. But I think you're looking at it, the previous seasons, before that, the 4 previous seasons, his lowest sack total was 11. Now, I understand that he's getting older, right? I understand he'll be 31 in September. So I think September 22nd. So early on in the season, he turned 31. But the Bucs are getting a guy who has had multiple double-digit sacks. Had 12 and a half his final year in Arizona in 2020. Had 11 for Carolina in 2021. Had 16 his first year in Philly in 2022, and then had 11 in 2023 with Philly before the whole thing with wanting a new contract. The other thing, and I haven't seen this mentioned anywhere. Well, I have seen one thing mentioned. Larry Foote, new Bucs outside linebackers coach. They moved him from inside to outside. He coached Haason Reddick in Arizona. You know who else has a little bit of insight on Haason Reddick who may be of use to the Buccaneers? Bruce Arians. Bruce Arians was the Cardinals head coach when Haason Reddick was drafted by the Cardinals in the first round. And Arians had actually said after that draft, now I understand that he's not going to, this may be true, maybe not, but I guess there were some questions around the Cardinals quarterback situation at the time. He was asked about it, and he said that Haason Reddick was better than any QB on our draft board. So they picked him 13th overall. So they picked him with a top 15 pick. I wonder if Jason Light or Todd Bowles maybe talked to Bruce Arians about a guy like Haason Reddick. Arians, like I said, scouted him, drafted him and worked with him for a season. So you do wonder if the Buccaneers got a little bit more insight there from Bruce Arians. Um, it's a fine deal. I don't think it's outstanding. I don't think it's awful because I think it's worth the risk. The reason I like it is because it's a 1 year deal. If they would have signed him for multiple years, I would have been a little bit more hesitant. But I think in Reddick's mind here, he wants to reestablish his value, right?
Yep.
And I think it could benefit both the team and the player. He goes out there, gets 12 sacks. Well, that benefits the Buccaneers because they have a double-digit sacker. That benefits Haason Reddick because he can go out next year, and even if it's not from the Buccaneers, he's going to get paid somewhere else. So I think it could be a win-win for both the team and the player. But you have to hope that like last year wasn't really a sign of things to come. Last year was just look, it was a cluster and it was a whirlwind and this and that, and it just didn't work out. Hopefully he can bounce back.
Yeah, and I think if there is any defensive coach who can get the most out of Haason Reddick in his system, it is going to be a guy like Todd Bowles. He is probably licking his chops right now, just thinking of all the things that he can continue to do with a bona fide pass rusher. I think the lack of production last year is going to be a big red flag for people, but as you mentioned, good player in a bad situation. Bad team, bad situation, bad culture. I don't know the ins and outs entirely of New York and their season last year.
Yeah,
but
I mean, come on. They were a mess.
Yeah, their head coach was on the way out while they're trying to figure out this massive contract. It was a losing battle. I would like to see this work out for Tampa Bay. But my follow-up question was going to be, if this does work out, if he is a 10-plus sack guy, it's a 1-year deal, are the Buccaneers going to be in a position next year to pony up and potentially pay for a top-tier edge rusher in the NFL? Because we talked briefly about it, but there's a couple of other good free agents that are going to be on the list next year. I think Zion McCollum might be at the top of that list. A couple of
Luke
other
Gedeke,
guys. Yeah.
Kate Otten, Mike Evans. So, I mean, they have a lot of money next year, but there's a lot of guys. So, yeah, I mean, that's a wait and see thing. If they really want him, you can keep him. But, I mean, basically, look, the Bucs are basically bargain shopping for a pass rusher. This is basically what bargain shopping is for a pass rusher in 2025.
I think
the Buccaneers signed Shaq Barrett to a 1-year, $4 million deal. That was 6 years ago. It's changed so much nowadays.
And I think when you look around at potential edge rushers that you could have signed for the same amount of money, I want to believe that Haason Reddick is still going to be head and shoulders better than a $14 million a year edge rusher. The contracts are getting bigger. The cap is going up. Salaries are going up. Edge rushers are some of the most handsomely paid players on the defensive side of the ball. So again, this is a guy that if 2025 is a 10-plus sack year for Haason Reddick, he's going to double his salary and then some. I have no doubt about that. But high risk, high reward. It's obviously got to work out. And I think that there are more pros than cons in this situation, especially when you think about the bargain buying the Bucs are doing. 1 year, $14 million here for at times elite edge rusher.
And again, I think the 1 year thing, right? He's gonna have something to prove, right? He is gonna have something to prove. I see a comment there that Bowles worked with Reddick. Bowles did not work with Reddick. When Reddick was in Arizona, by that point, Bowles was already with the Jets. It is actually funny that Todd Bowles, besides the Carolina Panthers, Todd Bowles has coached everywhere that Haason Reddick has been, just not together. Todd Bowles coached in Philly. Todd Bowles coached in Arizona. Todd Bowles coached the Jets, and now with the Buccaneers. So this is the first time they're going to be together. But look, the Bucs needed somebody, right? I mean, they simply did. You can argue whether or not Khalil Mack for an extra basically $4 million because it's a 1 year deal. You could argue whether or not you think that would have been better. I think Mack might have been the safer option, maybe. I think you would know what you're getting a little bit more with Khalil Mack.
Yeah.
So Reddick might have the higher upside though, and we'll see what happens. I don't think they're done at pass rusher. Now that I don't think that means you're going to see another, big deal. But Anthony Nelson obviously still out there. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka will not be back. Anthony Nelson, I could see him coming back, or I still think they are. think they're going to draft an edge rusher fairly early. Could he still even be the first round? Because again, Haason Reddick signed a 1-year contract, so it could very well be the first round.
I am curious. I mean, I guess your opinion doesn't seem to change that much, but I am personally curious on if the presence of Haason Reddick is going to bump them out of the first round for an edge rusher. I mean, listen, if the guy is there, you go get him. I think that's the mentality of this front office, and they know that. I don't think they're going to make a mistake here per se, especially with the crop of players they have available and the holes that this team has all over the place. But I am curious to see if their priorities for the first round have shifted a little bit, because this time 2 weeks ago, we were throwing out a lot of those incoming first round edge rushers. Maybe the big board changes a little bit, but let's get to the most recent deal now. Until, again, as you had mentioned, we get off of here and then the Buccaneers make another one. Right. As of right now, the most recent contract.
And probably the most impactful one.
Yeah,
right?
Probably
the biggest one.
Yeah, I think, Chris Godwin coming back and Haason Reddick, those are your two splash signings, if you will. I think everything else is going to feel very safe, and that's not a bad thing either. You love safe at this juncture. I think if Haason Reddick is the biggest risk that we are taking, then it will be a pretty good free agency. Also, just a sidebar here, has nothing to do with Tampa Bay, but the Buccaneers were listed as a team that was interested in cornerback Isaiah Rodgers. He is going to the Vikings. They are signing former Eagles and Colts cornerback Isaiah Rodgers. It's a 2-year contract for $15 million. Good for him. Chris Godwin is back in Tampa Bay on a 3-year, $66 million deal, somewhere between $44 and $45 million guaranteed. But reports say, Evan, regardless of being paid $22 million a year, which is cheap for a wide receiver when you look at these contracts, Chris Godwin left some money on the table to come back and play with Baker Mayfield and this Buccaneers offense.
Yeah, there was a lot of interest. Mostly, I Bleav, from the New England Patriots. I know a lot of people wanted to point out the Jaguars because of the Liam Cohen thing. I don't Bleav the Jaguars were involved as much. I think they expressed some level of interest, but there were some other teams, but the Patriots were the one that were the most interested. And Ian Rappaport said that Godwin had left a lot on the table. I think he mentioned on NFL Network like $20 million. Now that could be the agent sort of saying like, "Hey, look, my guy got offered this."
And that was, not to cut you off, but that was my first impression when those reports started rolling out. You remember it was maybe 3-4 days ago, right before the Lavonte David signing, where all these reports about teams like the Packers, teams like the Patriots, very wide receiver needy teams, are going to be running the market up on him. And there were reports that he's going to be getting paid well over $30 million is I Bleav the direct quote from the report that I had read.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, there's a lot of things going on. Look, throughout the last few days, right? There's been so much thrown, and you gotta remember, it's a game of chess, right? It is a game of chess between these agents and these teams. But kudos to the Buccaneers for getting this done. Kudos to Chris Godwin, for staying. That's the sign of a healthy organization, right? When your players want to stay, but it's also because the Buccaneers will reward their players. Right? They brought back Mike Evans. They brought back Baker Mayfield. They brought back Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean. And even if you didn't think they should have brought back some of those guys, like they brought back Anthony Nelson for depth. Like even a lot of depth guys that they reward their players, right? So they've re-signed Chris Godwin. This is the second time they've re-signed Chris Godwin now. So I think kudos to the Bucs, but kudos to Godwin. Obviously, clearly wanted to be in Tampa Bay. I know. Look, we just saw Myles Garrett, right? Money is king, basically, right? Yeah.
Cash is king.
There you go. Yeah, it is. DK Metcalf. He wanted to go to a warm weather state with a contender and a good quarterback. Well,
he went to Pittsburgh.
He got a brand new deal though. He got that. So you're seeing it, right? To where money is so important in the NFL now. And Chris Godwin definitely could have gotten more. but he elects to stay with the Buccaneers, and good for the Bucs, good for Godwin. And yeah, I mean that's just yeah, and apparently, like I said, I Bleav Albert Breer might have said. I want to check this really fast just to make sure I have this right. Um, I Bleav. No, I'm sorry. It was James Palmer. Sorry, James Palmer said that the Patriots offered Chris Godwin more money, but his relationship with Baker Mayfield and Mike Evans really helped keep him in Tampa Bay. So again, two guys that last year the Buccaneers re-signed. Right, the Buccaneers rewarded both those guys for their efforts. So yeah, it was pretty nice. And again, I expected it, right? I know that there were some people that maybe wavered, right? But I think that when you have a team like the Bucs, who's shown time and time again that they will keep their guys,
Yeah.
I had a good bit of faith that Chris Godwin was going to be returning.
Yeah, you and I said the entire way. You can go back and listen to most of the shows that we have done. I know we slowed down for a little bit, but every single time we checked in with you guys and we talked about Chris Godwin, we both had the feeling that he would ultimately be back in Tampa Bay. Very glad to see that happen. And overall with Chris Godwin, when we talk about him potentially playing out this 3-year deal in Tampa Bay, that is over a decade as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And I think that that really flies under the radar because, yeah, it feels like he's younger than Mike Evans in a lot of ways, and I guess he is a couple of years younger than Mike Evans. But when you look at the history books, when you look at statistics at the wide receiver position for this franchise, I mean, especially once he reaches the end of this 3-year deal, but as of right now, it's quite literally Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, number 1 and number 2, and then a huge drop off to number 3. Which is, maybe like a Jimmy Giles, maybe it's a Keyshawn Johnson if we're talking single season records. But Chris Godwin has become such an important piece, not only in this Buccaneers offense, but in the history of the franchise. He's a Super Bowl champion. And again, just continuing to not necessarily break records. It's going to take a while for anyone to break Mike Evans' records unless Godwin plays, 6 more years than Mike does. I don't think he's going to touch them.
Yeah, there's not that much of an age gap between
right. But I mean, I can't stress enough how good it is to see this guy back and potentially another guy who spends his entire career here. He will be in the Buccaneer record books for a very long time. And I hope he plays his whole career here because he deserves it. And the fact that, again, as we had mentioned, he took less money to stay with Baker Mayfield, to stay with Mike Evans. Like, the Buccaneers have a culture of guys who want to play with each other. They're not always chasing the next big payday. Chris Godwin could have easily taken more money, and he didn't. For one reason or another, he wanted to stay and play in Tampa Bay, and that's because they ultimately believe that they can win some football games. But, like, that is a culture, man.
Yeah.
We've talked over and over about it, but I think it just shows you how far the Buccaneers have come from, especially once we started this podcast in 2016. The Bucs were in shambles when you compare the team culture and the franchise, the front office, the tone of everything. The Bucs used to be a joke, and now guys want to take less money to stay in Tampa Bay. I mean, I think it's a good feeling with everything going on right now. And the Buccaneers with a very positive start to the free agency period. A lot of people are going to be very happy with Jason Licht once again.
Yeah, and I bet that doesn't go unnoticed to UFAs right now.
Yeah.
Right? That aren't even with the Buccaneers, but they notice that, right? Like Haason Reddick might notice that. Hey, if I do well, I might get paid by another team, but it might be this one. Like, those players, they recognize that. And yeah, it's been multiple occasions, not just with Chris Godwin, but like I bet you Mike Evans last year goes to market, probably could have gotten more. There's been a couple of instances. I think Jamel Dean a couple years ago. I know a lot of Bucs fans want Jamel Dean gone, but when he was a UFA, he probably could have gotten more elsewhere. And, he elected to stay. Yeah, it's happened time and time again, especially over the last, 4 or 5 seasons. And I think it speaks to, like you said, that culture that the Buccaneers have built. And another thing, Tampa is now a place that is still attractive to free agents, not just for money.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, okay, let's let's be real, right? Like Vincent Jackson, a great Buccaneer, but he signed to Tampa Bay because they gave him the most money, right? Like the Bucs in 2012 were not a team that were like, oh man, got to get there, right? Um, Now though, right, players are going to be taking less to stay, but pending free agents that are out there on the market right now might be willing to take less to come, and like a guy like Haason Reddick might be looking at it. He is, like I say, he's going to be turning 31 years old. He's not necessarily young. He views a team that has an opportunity to do something here, and has a culture that he wants to be a part of. So, I think it all comes together, right? Ben Bredeson wants to stay. Lavonte David continues year after year to come back. So I think it's really important what Jason Light and the front office have built, and it relies on, a couple of things. Obviously, winning helps, but the type of character, right, that they get with their football players, um, and that's why when you talk about the draft and you say, well, this guy has character concerns, probably not a Buck. It's probably true. Like it's probably something that is going to be true. Yeah, and I mean, when you talk about character, Chris Godwin might have the best character out of anyone on the football team. Like, I mean, I think he is just beloved in that organization, beloved in that locker room, and he is a pro's pro through and through. So, yeah, it is good to get rewarded. Happy to see Chris Godwin, and especially, like I said, after the injury, things are a little bit murky. I do think the injury helped the Buccaneers. I do. I think if Chris Godwin does get injured, I'm not sure if this scenario plays out this way.
Well, not
But
after
still,
not after the start of the season and the pace that he
right?
was on.
Or at least if he is back with the Bucs, it's probably at a higher number, right,
Yep.
than this. But regardless, again, the Buccaneers have made Tampa. Jason Light, and his staff have made Tampa, and I mean, and the coaching staff, right? Credit to Todd Bowles as well. They've made Tampa a place where players want to stay, and players who are on the outside want to come in and play. So it is a very good sign for the culture.
As we wrap this thing up, I just want to look ahead really quickly to some potential moves that could be on the way,
Yeah.
some things that fans could be looking out for, and then we will address some people in chat. Couple of names dropped. I figured maybe we could throw a couple of names out there. It's provocative. It gets the people going, and we'll talk about that as well. But for the Buccaneers, they're not done. They are certainly not done bringing in reinforcements, going after some guys, and picking up free agents, but I think the ultimate question is going to be if and when, really when, you ultimately start to see some of these restructures, because I think
it's going to be coming.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I bet as soon as we sign off of here, we're going to get some notification from Greg Allman about Mike Evans restructuring his deal, something or other. I'm waiting for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's it's going to be coming because the Buccaneers, I believe, had $8 million. Not going to cover what they just did, So, but an important reminder, though, right? The Buccaneers do not have to be under the salary cap until Wednesday at 4. So you can go over it as much as you want right now. As long as Wednesday at 4, you're under, you're good. So it's not like the Buccaneers, within the next 20 minutes have to do something here. They have until Wednesday at 4, and obviously they will be under the salary cap. We don't know what these cap hits for these guys are, right? Because we don't know the exact details. It may be a lot lower, right? Maybe they're using void years on some of them. Who knows? We don't know exactly how these deals are structured. So, yeah, but there will be some restructures coming, right? Antoine Winfield is a pretty obvious one. Tristan Wirfs, another one's pretty obvious. We'll have to wait and see. And again, and the Buccaneers probably aren't done in free agency. You're not just, they signed one outside free agent. You're going to sign probably more than one outside free agent. So, again, I don't foresee anything major. I don't foresee another, deal maybe like in the double digits. Like, I don't really think you're going to see that per se. But, I don't think they're done. And I think we'll be hearing a couple of more things, within the next week or so, 2 weeks maybe.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be entirely shocked either when you find out on the Godwin deal, because we don't know what his cap hit is going to be yet for 2025. I think those 3 years gives them a little bit more flexibility to determine what that 2025 cap hit is going to be. We will see. We'll ultimately see how it shakes out. But yeah, for Tampa Bay.
Eventful day, eventful hour. Really, I mean, it all came very quickly. So, 100 about 160 people in here. We appreciate you all. On this Monday afternoon, free agency frenzy. We appreciate you all tuning in.
Yeah, absolutely. The free agency shows are always fun. I think people are chomping at the bit to see what's going to be coming next. It is breaking news. Everybody clung to their phones. Twitter be damned. We're getting news out today, and we are getting it to you fine people. Appreciate you hanging out with us. One last question here, just because I want to throw some names around. I'm sure it's already been asked. You never know. Never say never. The Atlanta Falcons released Grady Jarrett after 10-plus seasons of service. What is his market like? Is he a guy that you think is too high dollar for the Buccaneers to consider taking a look at here as a depth piece on that interior defensive line? Because, again, he's played for a very, very long time. I mean, the Bucs have played Atlanta twice a year, so we know very well who Grady Jarrett is and what he's capable of. Is that someone the Buccaneers may be looking at, or are there any other names that you can think of that the Buccaneers would consider here for defensive line, for outside linebacker, or for really any of the holes that they have on the defensive side of the ball?
I mean, Jarrett's obviously a very, a notable name, right? I'm not sure if the Bucs would have any interest. I think they would maybe like to go a little bit younger than Jarrett at that position. But like you said, never say never, right? You never truly know. And he could be somebody, because I do think that, like, they probably should maybe look to add an interior defensive lineman at some point. Logan Hall had a good 2024, but like, he's entering a contract year. I don't know if I want to put all my eggs in the Logan Hall basket.
I think Greg Gaines should be back, but he played the most snaps last year that he has played in a while. And it showed.
I prefer somebody else to take those snaps.
Well, it showed. He was vocal about just the effect that it had on his body. He was starting to pop up on the injury report more and more. I think just an extra body, a younger body that can be a little more fresh and ultimately keep Greg Gaines off the field as much as he was last year. His snap count was higher than it, I think, has ever been in his career, possibly. He was playing a lot.
Yeah, so I think the Buccaneers should target an interior defensive lineman at some point. Thing is, I mean, we're looking at these markets. Javon Kinlaw, who I had as a target of mine, got way more money than I thought he was going to. Like, I think he got 15 a year from Washington. That's crazy to me. I like Javon Kinlaw. I know there's a lot of people that don't. I am a fan of Javon Kinlaw, and I would not have given him that deal. So I think, again, this might be a sort of a waiting game, right? Because the longer somebody sits out on the market, the lower the price is going to be. So I think the Buccaneers, if they do have any interest in some interior defensive lineman or another pass rusher maybe, or a corner, I think at this point you might be maybe waiting a little bit here and seeing like, all right, well, how about next week we check in and see if that price goes from 12 million down to 8 million, and then we can discuss something. I think that's sort of where you're at.
Yeah, no, I agree. For the Buccaneers, this front office, a wait-and-see approach is perfectly fine, especially because of the free agency you've had so far. By the time the legal tampering period begins, you've checked all of your boxes. We got Lavonte David back. You addressed, or you brought back a starter on the offensive line. That cannot be understated. You bring back Chris Godwin, and you go out and potentially fix your pass rush problem. I don't want to say fixed it entirely, but got the player that helps the biggest need, I think, is the correct way to order those words, right? That's how you know it's time for the show to wrap up here, is when my words start getting jumbled together. Ladies and gentlemen, that's just about going to do it for today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast, live on YouTube. Want to say thank you to everybody hanging out with us. As Evan had said earlier, well over 160 people in here at one time. Bat W, Rod Redding, Brandon Funk, Rodzilla Tequila. I like that one. Game On, Amazement 717, MK, our good buddy Mikey Kelly, Timothy Word, Christopher Cole, B. Woodson. What?
Appreciate Beaver with the 2-hour super chat earlier.
Yeah, shout out to Beaver. Clap it up for Beaver.
That's right.
Follow the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, going to be a lot of that this week. You can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at Bucs_Daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL.
When it's working.
Yeah, I don't remember if I said that or not yet, but yes, if Twitter is working at Evan NFL, and check out Evan's written work at bucksnation.com. What have you got this week?
All the breaking news. I mean, it's in. I wrote the story on Ben Bredeson earlier this morning. A couple minutes later, the Haason Reddick thing comes out. A couple minutes after that, the Chris Godwin thing comes out. So, it's like I said, it's a whirlwind trying to get it all caught up. So, it's not just me. It's the all hands on deck for everybody there at BucksNation.com. So, if there's Bucs news, a couple minutes later, go on BucksNation.com, find out all the details. Then, also stay tuned. Cannon Fire Podcast. It's emergency podcast season, right? So this is an emergency podcast. We planned on doing a podcast today. It was originally scheduled for around 3 p.m., but once the Buccaneers make all their moves by 1, that sort of changes things. So we'll see. And if they make a major move tonight, you might hear from us later tonight. Who knows? But thanks for all the support. And stay tuned to BucksNation.com for all the written breaking news.
Last but not least, you can follow myself, Instagram and Twitter at Retticus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. And be sure to check out Video Americana, VIDEOAMERICANA. I'm not going to spell that one every single time. You can sound it out. You should be able to figure it out. Video Americana on every single platform: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. All kinds of fresh content going up. We are working on a Strawberry Festival feature right now, and I'm very happy with it. I'm very happy with how it looks so far, and hopefully you will be too. But that's the show. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging out with us. We will talk to you later this week, I'm sure, with some more Tampa Bay Buccaneer news. Keep it locked right here, and make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/Cannon Fire Podcast. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off from my co-host, Evan Wanish. We will talk to you in the next one. Until then, and as always, thank you for listening, and go Bucs.